They figured he was just another easy target. A quiet man, sitting alone in a diner. Perfect for a little trouble. But when the bikers pushed him too far, they learned the hard way that some fights are over before they even start. The wind had a sharp edge that afternoon as Darius drove his truck into the gravel parking lot of Earl's Diner, a run-down roadside joint just off Route 66. You know the kind, where time seems to stand still, and strangers aren't exactly welcomed with open arms. The open sign buzzed faintly, flickering against the dusty glass, still clinging to life just enough to signal that the diner was open for business. Nearby, an old rusted gas station stood abandoned, its pumps long forgotten. Darius killed the engine, pausing for a moment to take in the diner before grabbing his wallet and cap. Inside the diner, everything was exactly as he expected. Checkered floors, vinyl booths that were splitting at the seams, and a jukebox sitting quietly in the corner, as if it hadn't played a song in years. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and stale grease, like a memory that wouldn't go away. The waitress, her eyes tired and worn, wiped down a counter that was already spotless, muttering something to the short-order cook behind her. Darius pushed open the door, and the bell above it jangled loudly enough to turn every head in the room. There were no smiles, no polite nods, just stares. The kind of stares that crawl over you before you even notice them. They were curious, cautious, and thick with an unspoken tension. At a corner booth, a group of bikers sat, draped in leather vests and dark sunglasses, their presence heavy in the air. Despite the dim lighting, their laughter died the second Darius stepped inside. But he didn't flinch. Calmly, he adjusted his baseball cap, kept his shoulders relaxed, and made his way toward a booth near the window. He preferred to face exits. Old habits die hard. The waitress approached, her pen tapping nervously against her notepad. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat. "Just a cheeseburger and fries," Darius answered quietly. "And a coffee, black." She scribbled it down without looking at him, her eyes darting to the bikers who were now watching him like hawks eyeing prey. But Darius didn't engage. He just sat there, tracing the rim of his coffee cup as if the room, the people, even the tension didn't exist. But it did, oh it did. And it was getting louder. One of the bikers, a broad man with a thick beard and tattoos covering his knuckles, leaned back in his chair, his voice booming enough to fill the diner. "Well, would you look at that? Looks like we've got ourselves a tourist." The others snickered, low and guttural. But Darius didn't react. The man wasn't done though. He leaned forward again. "Hey buddy, you deaf or just rude?" Just then, the waitress returned with Darius's coffee, her hand trembling slightly as she set it down in front of him. He gave her a faint smile and a soft thank you. It wasn't her fight, and she didn't need to feel guilty for walking away. So she did quickly. Darius took a slow sip of his coffee, unfazed. He didn't need to look up to know every pair of eyes in the room was now fixed on him. The atmosphere had shifted. Sides had already been taken, without a single word from him. Outside, the rumble of a truck echoed as it passed by, its tires crunching gravel beneath them. Inside, the air thickened, a storm on the horizon. Darius knew it wouldn't be long before something broke the silence. The bikers had stopped pretending. Every one of them locked their gaze on Darius, waiting for him to say something. Anything. "Maybe he's just shy," one of them said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Or maybe he's lost. Ain't much for his kind out here." And that did it. A low, cruel laugh rolled through the group like a wave crashing against rocks. The diner was small, but in moments like this, it felt like it was suffocating. Darius remained calm, slowly taking another sip of coffee, as if he hadn't heard a thing. He didn't flinch, didn't twitch. If anything, he looked bored, utterly uninterested. And that calm, that stillness, only made them angrier. The scrape of a chair sounded like thunder as the bearded man pushed away from the table. Boots thudded against the floor as he swaggered toward Darius, his presence heavy and deliberate. The others sat back, eager for a show. The waitress stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes flicking nervously between Darius and the biker who was closing in. Beardman Travis stopped right next to Darius's booth, his heavy leather vest reeking of sweat and stale cigarettes. "Hey, I'm talking to you, boy." The words cut through the air like a slap, sharp, cruel, deliberate. Darius didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. Instead, he gently set his coffee down on the saucer. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, his voice even and measured. There was no aggression in his tone. If anything, it was polite. But the way he said it, soft, deliberate, made Travis hesitate for just a moment. Travis narrowed his eyes. "You're sitting where you don't belong. Don't you know how things work around here?" Behind him, the other bikers snickered. One of them, a wiry man with stringy hair, shouted, "Show him, Travis. Teach him some manners." Travis. It was a fitting name for a man so desperate to prove himself. Darius exhaled quietly, a breath barely noticeable, but it was there. "I'm just here for lunch, that's all." The calm in Darius's voice only set Travis off more. He wanted a reaction, something to make it all worthwhile, something to justify the next move. Without warning, he slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the salt shaker. "I don't think you heard me, friend." Darius's gaze finally lifted, slow and deliberate, locking onto Travis. In that moment something changed. It wasn't aggression in Darius's eyes, and it certainly wasn't fear. No, what Travis saw was stillness. Deep, unyielding stillness. The kind that doesn't break, doesn't move, doesn't flinch. It unsettled Travis, though he didn't let it show. A beat passed, and then Darius's voice broke the silence. "Back off," he said quietly. Not a plea. Not a threat. Just a simple fact. Travis snorted, masking his discomfort with bravado. "Or what?" The diner fell into dead silence again. No one moved. Even the cook had stopped flipping burgers. Travis's patience, already fraying, finally snapped. "You're gonna learn some respect today." His hand shot out toward Darius's collar, fingers aiming to grab. But Darius moved faster than anyone could see. In the blink of an eye, his hand shot out, catching Travis's wrist midair. His grip was iron-tight. The biker froze, startled, as the force of Darius's hold made him feel smaller than he was. "Don't," Darius said softly. His voice still calm, but now there was an edge, a warning laced in the words. For a moment, Travis stood frozen, not sure what to do. The other bikers watched, waiting, silently egging him on to do something. He jerked his arm free with a sudden yank, stumbling back a step. His pride stung, but he wasn't about to show it. "Think you're tough, huh?" he spat, flexing his hand as if the pain could be erased by the act. "We'll see about that." He turned toward the rest of the gang. "Get up, boys." The air thickened as the other bikers, 5 in total, rose to their feet one by one. Smirking, cracking knuckles, rolling their shoulders as they prepared for whatever was about to unfold. Darius remained seated, watching them. His eyes cool and unblinking. No fear. No anger. Just that same impossible calm, a stillness that seemed to defy everything around him. The waitress, shaking, reached for the phone behind the counter. "Don't," she began, but Travis shot her a glare so sharp it made her shrink back helpless. Turning his attention back to Darius, Travis's voice was low, but full of venom. "You've got 2 choices, pal. Walk out that door right now or we take this outside." Darius didn't move. He didn't blink. His hand reached for his coffee cup, setting it down on the saucer with a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible. "I'd rather finish my lunch." Travis grinned like he had just won something. "Fine, we'll do it here then." The bikers closed in, forming a half-circle around the booth. They thought they had him trapped, that the numbers would be enough. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The diner had become a stage. Every person in the room an unwilling spectator. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the clinking of silverware ceased. The bikers loomed, their shadows stretching across Darius like threats. Travis, eager to reclaim his pride, cracked his knuckles and smirked. "Last chance, tough guy," Travis said. "Walk out now before we put you down." Darius stared at him, unblinking. There was no shift in his posture, no tensing of muscles. He looked almost bored. And that made Travis furious. "You just don't get it," Travis spat, and without warning lunged at Darius. The moment moved in slow motion for everyone else, but for Darius it was instinct, pure reflex like breathing. He didn't flinch or shuffle. It was a precise, practiced move. He slid out of the booth in one smooth motion, grabbing Travis's wrist mid-swing, redirecting the biker's force. Travis stumbled forward, caught off guard. Before he could react, Darius twisted his arm behind his back, guiding him straight into the table. A loud thud echoed as the biker's chest slammed into the laminate surface. One down. The others hesitated, startled. Darius released Travis, letting him crumple to the floor, groaning. Darius turned to the rest, his eyes calm but firm. "You don't want this," he said softly, almost like a piece of advice. But bikers don't back down, not with an audience. The wiry man with stringy hair was next. He charged at Darius with a yell, fists swinging wild. Darius sidestepped him like water flowing around a rock, then planted an elbow into the man's gut. The biker wheezed, folding over, and Darius used the man's momentum to send him sprawling into a nearby chair. 2 down. The remaining 3 bikers moved closer, realizing this wasn't just some bar fight. This was something else. Panic began to creep in, replacing their bravado, but by then it was too late. The largest of them grabbed for Darius's shoulder. A mistake. Darius turned sharply, trapping the man's arm and sweeping his leg, sending the biker crashing to the floor. Before the man could react, Darius knelt, pressing a knee into his back and whispered, "Stay down." The man froze, gasping for air, unable to move. 3 down. Another biker came from behind, wielding a chair. The attack was sloppy, desperate. Darius ducked effortlessly, then rose to grab the chair, yanking it free from the biker's hands. The man stumbled back, off balance, and Darius closed the distance. A controlled shove sent the biker crashing into a booth, where he collapsed in a heap. 4 down. The last biker hesitated, eyes wide, hands trembling. He looked around at his friends, bruised, broken, humiliated, then locked eyes with Darius, who hadn't even broken a sweat. Darius tilted his head slightly, a silent question in his gaze. "You done?" The biker swallowed hard, then turned and bolted for the door. The bell above it jingled wildly as he fled into the parking lot. 5 down. The diner went still. Darius exhaled, adjusting his baseball cap as he glanced at the aftermath. The bikers groaned from the floor, too shocked or winded to rise. Travis, still slumped over the table, looked up with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Darius met his gaze. "I told you to back off." The silence that followed was deafening. But it wasn't the fight people would remember. It was what came next. The diner sat frozen. No one moved. The silence felt heavier than the fight itself. The waitress stood behind the counter, her hand still on the phone she never got the chance to use. The cook peeked through the kitchen window, eyes wide, spatula hanging uselessly in his hand. Darius straightened up, his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. If you hadn't seen what had just happened, you'd think he was simply tying his shoe. Travis groaned as he pushed himself halfway up, his bruised pride far worse than his aching ribs. "What the hell? Who are you?" he muttered, pain and confusion in his voice. Darius looked down at him, his face unreadable. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. "Just a guy getting lunch," Darius said quietly. Travis glared at him through bloodshot eyes. "You ain't normal. What the hell are you?" Darius glanced around the diner. The eyes on him weren't filled with fear. They were filled with awe, respect. People weren't used to seeing someone that calm, that capable. He sighed softly, shaking his head. "You don't want to know." The wiry biker, still slumped against a chair, managed to croak out, You military or something?" Darius didn't answer. He turned and walked away from them, heading toward the door. Back at his booth, Darius found his meal just as he left it. Burger and fries untouched, the coffee cup half full. Without a second thought, he picked up a fry and bit into it, as though the events of the last 5 minutes never happened. The waitress, still shaken, moved forward cautiously. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Sir, are you okay?" Darius looked up, offering her a soft smile. "I'm fine, ma'am." She blinked in stunned silence. After what he had just done, he sounded so calm, so polite. She glanced at the bikers sprawled across the floor, then back at him. "Hey, I'll get you a fresh burger," she stammered. "No need," Darius replied with a gentle shake of his head. "This one's just fine." At a distant booth, an older man, someone's grandfather with a weathered farmer's tan and calloused hands, muttered, "I ain't never seen anything like that before." Darius ignored the whispers beginning to ripple through the room. He knew exactly what they were thinking. A calm man in a world full of noise stands out. People remember that. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and neatly placed them under the edge of his plate. Standing up, the sound of his boots echoed through the diner, the only noise in the room as he made his way to the door. The waitress, still watching, called out, "Wait. Who are you really?" Darius paused, hand on the door, and glanced back at her. For just a moment longer than expected, he met her gaze. With a faint smile, he said, "Just a guy who knows how to finish his lunch." Then he stepped outside. The bell above the door jingled softly as it closed behind him. Outside, the gravel crunched under Darius's boots as he walked toward his truck. The biker who had fled earlier stood near his motorcycle, staring at him in shock. He didn't speak, just stepped aside as Darius climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, breaking the stillness that had settled over the parking lot. Darius put the truck in gear, glancing once in the rearview mirror at the diner and the people still standing inside, watching him leave. Then he drove off down the empty road. The bikers would heal. The bruises would fade. But the lesson would stick. You can't judge a man by how he looks, how he talks, or where he comes from. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should never test. But for the people in that diner, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. That small diner on Route 66 would never be the same. Word spread quickly about what had happened, about the stranger who effortlessly took down a gang of bikers. People would tell their friends, their families, their co-workers. It grew with every retelling. "I was there," someone would say, "the guy barely moved. Took those bikers apart like he was tying his shoes. Didn't even break a sweat." Another would add, "He was calm the whole time, like he didn't even see them as a threat." The waitress told her version too, her eyes wide as she described the stranger's stillness, his precision. "I asked him who he was," she'd say. "And you know what he told me? Just a guy getting lunch." For the bikers, the lesson was even harder to swallow. Their bruises would heal, but the humiliation would linger. Travis, the loudest of them all, was the quietest for weeks afterward. Every time someone teased him about the diner, he'd flush red in the face and mutter, "Forget about it." But deep down he wouldn't forget. None of them would. That day shattered their arrogance. It taught them that strength doesn't lie in numbers or in how loud you are. Sometimes true strength is in knowing you could fight, but choosing not to until there's no other option. As for Darius, he didn't care about the stories. He didn't want the recognition. To him it was simple. You treat people with respect, mind your own business, and if someone crosses the line you handle it, not with anger but with control. Somewhere down that lonely stretch of highway, Darius drove on. The miles passed by like whispers, the sun dipping low on the horizon. He wasn't thinking about the diner anymore or the bikers. His mind drifted back to his time as a Navy SEAL, to the missions that no one would ever hear about, the people he had protected, the lives he had changed, and the quiet moments when he made a difference without anyone ever knowing. Even when they didn't know they needed protecting, that was what mattered to him. Not the noise, not the ego, just the job. As Darius drove, a faint tune played on the old radio, the kind of song that makes the road feel endless and free. A few miles later, he pulled off to another small roadside stop, this time a gas station. He stepped out of the truck, stretched his legs, and grabbed a bottle of water from inside. The cashier, a teenage kid with headphones dangling around his neck, glanced up as Darius approached the counter. "You headed somewhere important?" the kid asked, trying to make conversation. Darius smiled faintly, tossing a few bills on the counter. "Nope, just passing through." The kid nodded, his eyes catching something in Darius's stance, something that didn't quite fit. "You military or something?" Darius paused for half a second, then shrugged. "Just a guy getting water." He stepped back outside, bottle in hand, and climbed into his truck. As he pulled back onto the road, the cashier watched through the window, feeling something he couldn't quite describe. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. And just like that, Darius was gone. Another town. Another stretch of road. He didn't need recognition, didn't want it. But for everyone he left behind, his quiet strength spoke volumes. A reminder that you don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who let their actions do the talking. Respect isn't earned through loud words or intimidation. It's earned through control, composure, and quiet strength. The people who seem the calmest are often the ones who fought the hardest battles. Never judge someone by what you think you see. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what really matters in life.